At 10:15 p.m., inside a crowded theater in Washington, D.C., a gunshot echoed through the laughter. Seconds later, the President of the United States lay dying. The Civil War had just ended, but America's most shocking political crime was only beginning. April 14th, 1865. The American Civil War was finally over. After 4 years of unimaginable bloodshed, the Union had survived. President Abraham Lincoln, exhausted, aging beyond his years, believed the worst was behind him. But in a crowded theater in Washington, D.C., a man was waiting. By sunrise, the President of the United States would be dead, and America would never be the same again. The Civil War had claimed more than 600,000 lives. Families were shattered, cities burned, the country was divided, North and South, victory and defeat. On April 9, 1865, Confederate General Robert E. Lee surrendered. Church bells rang across the North. Celebrations filled the streets. President Lincoln gave a speech just days later, speaking not of punishment, but reconciliation. He urged unity, compassion, healing, but not everyone was celebrating. John Wilkes Booth was not an unknown extremist hiding in the shadows. He was one of the most recognized actors in America. Born in 1838 into a famous theatrical family, Booth had performed on some of the country's most prestigious stages. Audiences admired his charisma and striking presence. But behind the applause was a deeply committed Confederate sympathizer. Booth opposed abolition. He believed strongly in states' rights, and he viewed Abraham Lincoln as responsible for the South's defeat and the destruction of its social order. In 1864, Booth and several associates began discussing a plan not to kill the president, but to kidnap him. The idea was to capture Lincoln and exchange him for Confederate prisoners of war. They made multiple attempts, all failed. Then on April 11, 1865, Lincoln delivered a public speech suggesting limited voting rights for black men. Booth was in the crowd that night. He reportedly told a companion, "That means citizenship. Now by God, I'll put him through." Within days, Booth abandoned the kidnapping plot. What followed was no longer a scheme for leverage. It became a plan for assassination. Booth recruited several conspirators. Their mission was chillingly ambitious: kill President Lincoln, kill Vice President Andrew Johnson, kill Secretary of State William Seward. 3 strikes, 1 night. They believed chaos would revive the Confederacy. Booth chose the date carefully. April 14th, Good Friday. The president would attend a comedy play at Ford's Theater. Booth knew the theater intimately. He had performed there. He knew every hallway, every exit, every shadow. That evening, Washington was calm. Lincoln arrived at Ford's Theater around 8:30 p.m. with his wife, Mary Todd Lincoln. The audience rose and applauded as he entered the presidential box. He smiled. He waved. It would be his final public appearance. The play was a light-hearted comedy, Our American Cousin. Around 10:15 p.m., the audience erupted in laughter at one of the play's funniest lines. That was the moment Booth had been waiting for. He quietly slipped into the president's box. He carried a single-shot .44 caliber Derringer pistol and a dagger. Lincoln was seated, unaware. Booth raised the gun and fired. Pause. Silence. The bullet struck Lincoln in the back of the head. Major Henry Rathbone tried to stop Booth, but Booth slashed him with the dagger. Then, in one of the most dramatic escapes in history, Booth leapt from the balcony to the stage below. He broke his leg on impact, but he stood and shouted, "Sic semper tyrannis," thus always to tyrants. Then he disappeared into the night. Lincoln was carried across the street to a boarding house. Doctors worked desperately, but the wound was fatal. The president never regained consciousness. At 7:22 a.m., April 15th, 1865, Abraham Lincoln was pronounced dead. Secretary of War Edwin Stanton reportedly said, "Now he belongs to the ages." Across the nation, grief spread like wildfire. People wept openly in the streets. Church bells rang in mourning. The first assassination of a United States president had succeeded. Booth fled Washington on horseback. Despite his broken leg, he escaped into the Maryland countryside. For 12 days, the largest manhunt in American history unfolded. Bridges were guarded, farms were searched, rewards were offered. Finally, Booth was tracked to a tobacco barn in Virginia. Union soldiers surrounded it. The barn was set on fire. Booth refused to surrender. A soldier shot him through the neck. He died hours later.